Hi, and welcome. We're going to talk about Spectra, open source biomedical imaging, an open source gateway to move medical imaging forward. What if biomedical imaging was more accessible? Once upon a time, computers used to take up whole rooms and were only accessible to a very small number of highly qualified people. The true revolution happened when personal computers came to the forefront and everybody had one. And everybody innovated, and we had the dot-com boom, we had the internet, and then we had phones in our pockets. And I think the same is true of medical imaging. So right now, an MRI takes up a whole room and costs millions of dollars. But if we could make it smaller and more accessible, we would change how people use it, and we would accelerate healthcare. The ivory tower of medical imaging, the CAT scanner, it uses ionizing radiation, which causes cancer, yet still it costs a few $1 million. The MRI, helium quenching chamber, dedicated maintenance staff, a few $1 million again. The ultrasound, much smaller and only $100,000 for a medical grade ultrasound, but still it's a bedside unit that you wheel around. And then there's the EEG, which, although it's not a medical imaging device, it's an important diagnostic tool and costs about $40,000 for a medical grade EEG. There are startups innovating in medical imaging. For instance, Hyperfine is making a bedside MRI, which is a terrific improvement, but that's still not a portable wearable device. Now, Butterfly Networks is making a low-cost ultrasound, but it's closed source, it's also not yet available, and it's still a fair bit more expensive. Which is why we have Spectra. Spectra is the world's smallest medical imaging device. It's only 2 inches squared. The way that it works is through a technique called electrical impedance tomography, which sends tiny alternating currents through a conductive body at different angles, and then it uses the same technique as a CAT scan to recreate that image. Over here on the right, you can see a typical test setup, which shows a cup being rotated around the tank, and we are able to reconstruct exactly where that cup is located only with current. Then on the left, you can see 2 cups in the tank, and we can precisely spatially localize them. This is important as the technique uses currents that are so small they're within the IEC's guidelines for safe use on humans, meaning that you can just wrap it around your thorax and then get a reconstruction of your lungs. Over here on the right is a reconstruction of my lungs compared to a CAT scan. I'm doing this with a tiny, accessible, Bluetooth-enabled device. This is pretty cool, but you can also do other things as well. You can measure any conductive change within a body. It's not limited to lungs. You could measure bladder changes. You can measure stomach changes, long-term muscle or fat changes, or short-term muscle changes in the case of gestural control. Since Foundry started, we have both executed and delivered our crowdfunding campaign. That means that everybody who backed us has now received their Spectra device. Just to remind you around the history of medical imaging and MRI, in 1977, the top left was the first MRI image of lungs. It's not very high resolution, but we've come a long way since then, and on the lower left you can see my brain taken with an MRI scanner at UCSF actually, when I used to work there, and it's much higher resolution now. It's improved a huge amount. Now, an MRI scanner has always used a big magnet, whereas this technique doesn't use anything large or expensive. So, although we get a low-resolution image now, the question is, how do we improve that and make it better whilst keeping it accessible and something that is able to be mass manufactured? You might ask about my background and why I can do this. Well, I've got 15 years experience in biosensor wearable startups, including founding a medical device startup called Lear Scientific. We were looking at neurogenic bladder disorder then, and we were backed by SOS Ventures. I've also got previous experience as a CPO and co-founder of another startup called Good Parent, which is a biosensor wristwatch aimed specifically at children that raised $6.5 million. I was a key part of Basis, which is another biosensor wristwatch that later got acquired by Intel and sold over 40,000 units. I was part of Emotive, which was a consumerized EEG system, which you can still buy today. And I've been published in Nature through Ghazali Lab, looking at brain training. So, what would happen if there was a safe form of medical imaging that people could hack with and improve upon? Well, I think it would encourage people to be more curious about their bodies, for one. Maybe as curious as they are about their computer, which I think would be a tremendous step forward. And it would also encourage preventative medicine, as well as being very excited about where machine learning can go when used in conjunction with this data that's coming out of Spectra. So you might ask what people are doing now that they've received their Spectra units. Mayo Clinic is looking at an intracranial pressure application for improving neurosurgery. There's a study on infant lungs, as they can't go in CAT scans due to it causing cancer. So this technique is appealing. There's a gestural control lab that's looking at spatial localization using this technique, as EMG can't do spatial localization. There's a startup looking at cervical mucus tracking for fertility prediction. And then there's another dentist that's looking at cavity detection, as this technique could be a replacement to X-rays. Another startup is doing a lab-on-a-chip application, looking at embryo analysis. So, where to next? We would like to create a big community of people that move medical imaging forward. We want the technology to improve, be accessible, be mass producible, so that more people have access to medical imaging tools. This may mean combining with other technologies and creating a more accessible and higher powered tool. So how can we continue this effort? It doesn't fit into the standard VC model, as we are aimed at medical applications. So we really want to improve people's healthcare. It doesn't necessarily have to place shareholder returns first. We do value growth, we encourage curiosity, and most of all, we want medical technology to improve as quickly as possible because it's key to the future of humanity. We need your help. Are there philanthropic investors and organizations that believe safely democratizing medical imaging is important? If so, we would love to chat and will be available after the presentations. You're also welcome to email us at Jean@MindEyeBiomedical. Check out the website or check us out on Twitter. Thank you very much. Thanks.